Okay, we're looking at the radio, and there's three things that we want to do. We want to set the frequency to the correct frequency. I have this in memory mode, and on memory channel 50 actually brings up 145.050. But you could just do it manually if you wanted to, and just dial in the particular frequency. But again, we're looking at on VHF FM 145.050. The second thing we want to do is check our power level. So we hit the power button and come over, and you can see our levels at 30. I can hit my station with 5 watts. So 5 to 10 watts, if you've got a good shot at the station, is plenty. So the power is set. The other thing that we have to do is set the squelch. The system won't operate correctly unless the squelch is set. So we're going to turn up the volume so we can hear it, and then we're just going to set the squelch. And then the volume control is really irrelevant. I'm going to leave it up so we can hear it a little bit, but you could have the volume totally off and it wouldn't matter. So let's go back, now that the radio's set, let's go back and actually run this session.
Okay, so we're ready to go. The radio's set, and we have our station we're going to call in here. We would listen to the frequency and make sure that the frequency's not in use. You don't need to announce it or anything, but just listen to make sure that there's not another station running, and it's quiet at the moment, so we'll just hit start. You notice it goes out into the Cantronics and makes the make sure it's working okay. You can see here where we're connected to my gateway, and it'll run through the process of checking with the CMS server. In this case, it went to Halifax and checked for my email, and it's not going to find anything, so it'll come back with an FQ and then a disconnect. Okay, so there we go. You can see what's happened there. We went out and talked to my station and made the connection, didn't see any mail, and so disconnected. And that's it. That's how you run a packet session. The next thing that I want to show you is that this was a direct connection to my radio, my gateway. The other way of doing this is with a digipeater. And just think of a digipeater as a repeater for digital communications, for packet. Locally here in our area, there's a digipeater called English Mountain, and the lettering for that is ENGMTN. That's actually pretty easy to remember, just because of the way that they use it to identify it. English Mountain. So what's going to happen when I make the call this time is it will go out to English Mountain, and then English Mountain will repeat the signal out and to my station. My station will receive it, make the call back to English Mountain, and then back to here. So if you have a particular location that you can't get into directly, a lot of time locally there'll be a digipeater that you can go through. So we're going to take a shot at doing this with English Mountain. So again, we're ready to go. Listening on the channel, there's nothing happening. So we just hit start, and we'll be off and running. The main thing to know about digipeaters is it'll take the system a little bit longer on every transmission because it's got to make that hop every time. So if you're downloading really long files, large files, it can make it a little bit longer to happen.
One thing I did want you to know, if you look at the ALC level, when it's transmitting, when this is red, you notice that it comes up and there's 3 bars. On all of our transmissions, we want it to be up in the 3rd bar, but not past it. If it's past it, we're overmodulating. But the Cantronics is going to automatically watch that and place it in that area. But if for some reason it was too high, it was going up and above the 3rd bar, then we would go in and make the change at the setup under our transmit level that I showed you earlier. So that's where you would adjust it if you needed to adjust how hard the Cantronics was pushing the system.
Okay, so there you go. We finished the session with English Mountain on my gateway, and you can see here that it's gone through and connected, and it connected to Halifax this time for the CMS. There wasn't any mail and it disconnected. So we're done with the session. We'll just hit exit, and that will close our packet session. The next type of session we're going to look at is a pack tour session. So we'll come over here to our drop down and choose pack tour. This will be using our SCS PTC2 Pro DPS multi-mode pack tour controller. So we'll open a session just like we would with any other, and that'll get us started. Now you can notice that it comes up, it tells you to stand by, it's initiating. It's basically already set up, but if you would not set up the correct settings, it would come up and give you an error. So we're going to start out by looking at the setup. Next to exit, setup is the first place you want to go to here. So click on setup, and there are two particular things we need to look at: the Tnc setup and the radio setup. So let's start with the Tnc. This is information that's specific to the PTC2 Pro. Again, we want to have our FCC ID. That's the Morse code that it'll normally send out, so you want that checked. And then we're going to come down here and pick out the TNC type. So these are all the different pack tour ones that the system's capable of. If you've got a 2 USB, you can choose that one. We have the Pro model here, so we'll click on that one. Again, we can go to our COM port here. One thing that makes this easy, I showed you how to go check the COM port. It's only going to bring up the COM ports that are actually available. In this case, there's only one, so you know if it's the adapter's working correctly, that it has to be that COM port. The next ones are TNC serial baud rate. This is how it's going to be connecting to the computer. Again, we'll choose 9600. That's what we set it at. The PSK level here and the FSK level, they're at 100 here. These are the transmit levels, and I just run them both at the same number, whatever it is. When we're looking at our ALC level, if it's too high or too low, you can adjust it here. Now, you can't adjust it during an actual session, but after you run a session or two, you can see if it's running high or low and make the changes here. The other thing that will affect that is which band you're on. Some bands affect the ALC and make it run higher or lower just because you're using that particular band and how it interacts with your antenna. But anyway, start with 100 here, and if you do need to change these, you can just go in and click these up and down. They go in units of 10, and just make adjustments up and down 10 or 20 at a time, and change them both if you do need to do that. So we'll leave those at 100. The 30 is fine for delay, and the max factor level is 3. That's the most that this box is capable of. If you wanted to throttle it down to only run in 2 for some reason, you could do that, but leave that in 3. Okay, so there we go. Those are our setups, and so when we're done with that, we'll just hit update, and it will go out, and you can see it's initializing the unit, and it'll come back and tell me if it's ready. And so we're right here just a moment, and you see it comes back and it's ready. If it says ready, you're good to go. So let's come back up here and check our radio connection. So we'll go to Setup, come down to Radio Setup, and this is where we tell the Pactor unit how to talk to our TS2000. And the reason we wanted to do that is so they will automatically tune the channels for us and set that up. It makes life extremely easy. So again, we'll just choose the radio we're working with. Again, we choose Kenwood. It's the generic for all the Kenwood radios. But if you had a Yaesu or an ICOM or whatever, you could choose those. You can also run it in manual if you wanted to manually tune your particular radio. So we'll choose Kenwood Amateur. We're always going to be an upper sideband, so we'll choose that. Just leave your antenna selection to default. You can tell it which antenna to use and whether or not to use the internal tuner. And what will happen is it'll automatically tune up the tuner every time it does that, and you really don't need to do that. We're going to manually do that. I'll show you that in just a minute. So just choose Kenwood Amateur and upper sideband and leave the antenna selection to default. The radio control port, how we're going to do that, on the radio is we're going to use the TNC and let the TNC make those changes. And on the radio itself, if you go in the radios menu, the baud rate that we set the radio at is 9600. Again, you could choose whatever one you want to do, but we're running at 9600. So that's all you got to do, hit update. So now it's talking to the radio. I don't know if you could hear that, but when it says ready here, as soon as it does that, the radio is going to beep at you 3 or 4 times. It'll go beep, 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 and it actually will change the channel to whatever is currently here. So you know the control of the radio is working immediately if you hear that. That's just the setup that it uses. So just be aware of that. And the main thing you want to do is look at the dial frequency, which would actually be this frequency right here. The center frequency is the upper sideband frequency, but the dial frequency, this is the number you actually want to see on the radio when you look at the radio. And so you always want to confirm that this number when you're getting ready to make a transmission. Okay, so let's go up. The one thing that I didn't talk about is switching to peer-to-peer in the packet. If we were going to run a peer-to-peer session, you would click on switch to peer-to-peer and it would switch this over to that. It's always going to default to a Winlink session because that's what people normally use. So that's what this button's for. Channel selection. This is where we go and figure out who in the world we're going to talk to. So you'll notice that it brings up this channel selector for HF. If we were in packet, of course, it brought up the one for packet. So you can tell here that we've got the call sign, the frequency they're running at, the different packet modes. You notice that it goes P1 through P4. We're interested in P3 if we can find one. Grid square, hours of operation. You do need to make sure the station is operating if you're going to use it. Of course, these are all public groups. It does give you the distance in miles, which is what we chose earlier, to the station, and also the bearing. If you've got a rotatable beam antenna, then that would be a deal. All antennas act a little different, and they all don't have perfectly omni patterns. I know my inverted V at home tends to have a northeast, southwest strength. That's where it's the best, and so I can hit places up the East Coast, and actually Halifax is my that antenna's favorite station, just because it tends to be orientated towards that. So at different stations, this bearing will sometimes be a better determinant of how good a chance you're going to have of hitting that station. But you notice we have a path reliability and then path quality estimate. This number right here, the higher the better. And you notice as we come down through the list, they change to yellow. That's iffy. And then if these are in red, well, it's saying you probably aren't going to be able to connect to it. So these are ordered this way. You can change the default of this if you wanted to sort by call signs, if you were looking for a particular call sign, and then just pull down to the particular call sign you were looking to. So if I was looking to connect to VE1Z, these are all VE1Z's channels that are available, and so I could pick the particular frequency that I wanted to go with. And of course you do have the indicators here. Right now it's telling me that the 20 meter band would be the best one to try to take a shot at. So anyway, you can sort it that way. You can sort it by mode. You can sort it by bearing and distance if you want to go by your antenna's best bearing. And so there's different ways that you can sort, but the default path selection, and if you click it once, it just reverses it. Your best path selection is what it's going to default to. So we're going to pick KC4 TVO, and you can see the information on it here. It's not very far away from this station. It's got a 50 number on it. Really anything above 40 is pretty good, but anything above 50 you really should be able to hit it unless there's a problem. So I can either double click on this or I can come up here and select this, and at that point it's going to actually put it the call sign in and load the frequency and change the radio to that frequency. So you can see that it's done that. So we can confirm that it's at 7102.2, and that's what's actually on my radio, and it's initiated, and so it's basically ready to go. So let's look at the 3 things we need to do at the radio first before we actually make a call.